Again, I'm Stephanie Carpenter. I am the program officer here at the Hamilton Woodtype and Printing Museum in Two Rivers, Wisconsin. And we are very excited that you're joined us. We're very excited that Julie's here today. And we want to start with a land acknowledgement. We want to recognize and honor Indigenous peoples as traditional stewards of the land. This is to acknowledge the traditional territory, recognize its longer history reaching beyond colonization and the establishment of European colonies, as well as its significance to the Indigenous peoples who lived and continue to live upon this territory. So we want to acknowledge the Menominee, Ojibwe, Ho-Chunk, and Potawatomi tribes. A little housekeeping to let y'all know this is being recorded. Our wonderful reminder from Rick Griffith. If you don't want, I know, I love his Zoom cards. If you don't want to be seen on the recording, in the lower left-hand corner, there's a stop video. You can click on that. You won't be recorded and it won't be shared. You won't be seen when we do the share, but you'll still see us. We do ask that you please stay muted while Julie is speaking and doing her presentation. If you have any questions though, it's why Jim and I are here. We'll help watch the chat. So if you have any questions, you can put them down there. You can talk in the chat to your friends. And if there's anything that's timely, I'll make sure to ask Julie. We will have some time at the end if you want to unmute and ask more questions or continue to put them in the chat, either works. Hamilton Hangs are supported in part with the generosity of Heffler & Co. And I want to say you can check out their amazing collections of fonts at typography.com. And I want to say thank you so much. Julie Chen, if you don't know her work, it is stunning. It is inventive, it is inspirational, it is immaculate. And I'm really excited that she agreed to share more with us today, both of her studio and the work she's working on. If you don't know Julie, which I feel like everyone knows Julie, but if you don't, it was established Flying Fish Press in 1987. She was a graduate student in book art at Mills College in Oakland, California. The press focuses on the design and production of limited edition artist books with an emphasis on three-dimensional and movable book structures and fine letterpress printing. Editions range in size from 25 to 150 copies, and these works are meticulous with attention to craft. They are intricate, they are inspired, and Julie's approach to the artist books involves intensive explorations from both form and content. Her work is heavily rooted in the idea of the book as a physical object and a time-based medium. And I had the pleasure of helping Julie when she came to Hamilton a couple of years ago, working with really big wood type for a half century. She was printing on our big Vandercook 320. And I got to visit your studio when I was out at Mills taking a class. Yeah. So I want to say thank you so much for being here. I'm going to hand it over, and thank you everybody for joining us. So thanks, Julie.
Thanks, Stephanie. I want to thank you and Jim for inviting me to do a Hamilton Hang. Stephanie and I were talking before everybody got let in, and I was saying how much I enjoyed being at the museum and really want to figure out a way to come back. But in the meantime, I'm glad to be part of this program that you're doing during the pandemic times. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Let me do that. Get started. Okay. Then I'm going to move my, little script in front of me. I don't know, those of you who've done, I'm sure there are a lot of people out there who've done a lot of Zoom sharing or Zoom presentations over the last however many months, but it's really hard to have your notes in front of you when you're sharing on Zoom unless you have a second screen. So I can't really show it to you because it's too close to the screen, but I have my paper version of my notes sitting in front of my screen now, so I can remember what I'm going to say. So anyway, the other thing I wanted to mention is, as part of my thank you for being here, is I did attend the recent Away's Goose, the Hamilton Away's Goose, and we were talking about that also before the program started, and it was such a fun time, although not nearly as much fun as being there in person, but as close as possible. So they did a fantastic job with that. So I'm going to start by talking a little bit about my studio, and then I will also, I'm going to show talk about one of my recent projects, and also one of the project I'm working on right now. So I'm going to start by showing you my house, because I have worked out of this house for the last 35 years, and I've always had my studio in the house from the time I got my first Vandercook back in the mid 80s. And the heavy equipment all lives in the garage, which is attached to the house. And then my studio spaces have moved around over the years within the house. These days, I have been spending a lot of time teaching online from my studio. And over the summer, I figured out what I thought would be a good way for me to go between lecturing and demonstrating. So that I'm putting this in for all you people who are teaching workshops or classes online. I had a stand made so my laptop sits over my document camera. And this way I can switch back and forth between being a talking head and showing what's on my table, and it works really well. You can see me there standing on a platform because I had to raise up the camera high enough so that I had a big enough working space on the table, but that means I have to be raised up because I'm very short. I'm 5 feet tall on a good day. So there I am wearing my Birkenstocks because of course you don't see the bottom half of me when I'm teaching classes. And I want to give a little plug for my school. I teach at Mills College. We have an MFA program in book art. And if I do say so myself, I really think this is a wonderful program. And I just had my last class session yesterday. Woohoo! Teaching online has been very challenging in a lot of ways, but it's also been really rewarding. I've been very proud of what my students have been able to do by working at home. And for some of them, that means working in their dorm rooms. And so we had, we're able to figure out a way for everybody to get their work done. So that was very rewarding. And I'll be teaching online, as most people who are teaching in academia, again in the spring. So I'm, gearing up for that one. So this is a brief video of my one of my studio spaces. It's my bindery space, which is just 200 square feet. I could have shown it to you in one photograph probably, but I figured it'd be kind of fun to take a little video tour. So, I'm just going to go through the space and you can see me turning the corner in my little area, moving towards the closet. So this is most of the bindery stuff. We put together books in this space. Here you can see I had to give over one whole table to my online teaching. Here's, you see what's on the table when it's in the document camera. And then unfortunately for me, my studio assistants have not been able to come back to work this whole time because, as you can see from this little video, my space is not large enough to allow for social distancing. So they've been working from home, but there's a limit to what they can do from home for me because a lot of it's bindery work. And then here's my little toy collection. Even though my studio is small, I like to have fun little objects around for just kind of inspiration. I also have a fairly large collection of fake food and miniature food, but that's a whole other presentation. So, we won't go in. I'm not going to show you the rest of the collection, but you can just see panning around to the rest of the space. So it's just this small room. And then we're going to walk down this little hallway and you'll see my office, which is even smaller. So this was like my 200 square foot bindery space. And then we turn the corner here. And this is my little 100 square foot office where I'm broadcasting right now. And then out the window, you can see this little shed that I had built in the backyard for packing books, because I was completely out of space in the house. And so all the packing materials live out there. And so this is two of my spaces in the house. And then the next video is, this is my press room. So this is the garage that you walk down a short hallway through the laundry area and where I'm standing right now as we start. And then this is my heavy equipment room. So I've got a big table space for cutting book cloth. My laser cutter is in the corner, and I've had the same machine since 2001, and it's a real champ. Hasn't ever failed me. We're about to do a big refurbishment next year, the 20-year mark. And as we turn around, you can see I've got, my guillotine paper cutter. There is the Kensal, the foil stamper lives in the garage because it's too heavy to move around in the house. And then my Vandercook Universal 3 there in the corner. And as you can see, as we're panning around the two rooms, storage is really important to me because I make editions of books, and I need a lot of flat file storage space to store all the parts of the books in process. And I have a total of 75 flat file drawers in my various studio spaces, and I could use more, but I have no more room for any more. So this is just turning around, and you can see the table there, my big table. And that just got moved recently from upstairs, and so we had to move everything downstairs. But now everything, my whole studio space, all the spaces are now on the same level, which is very, very helpful. So I'm going to talk about one of my recent books, and then after showing this, I'll talk about what I'm working on now. So this is my my latest book that was published, and it was published in 2019, but I started it in 2017. I had a 30-year retrospective exhibition at the University of Washington Libraries in Seattle, and I invited my whole family to come up for the opening. So this is the backstory about this book. And after my artist talk at that show, my daughter Eleanor, who is now in her mid-30s, asked me what seemed like at the time like a simple question. She said, "I notice you don't use a lot of texture in your books. Why is that?" I explained that as a printer, I'm interested in turning textures into visual patterns that can be printed using letterpress. And she countered with what at the time seemed like a very straightforward challenge. She said, "I think you should try to use actual texture in your next book." So I decided to take up this challenge, which ended up taking me into a 2-year-long journey about ideas having to do with the physical versus the visual, and ended up being a much more difficult task for me than I could have imagined. After a number of false starts, wayfinding ended up being about the differences in experience between physical learning and mental learning. It consists of 4 trays that are hinged together, and the first full opening reveals 2 trays containing 3-dimensional cast paper elements and 2 booklets that are formatted in the dragon scale binding, which is an ancient Chinese style of binding that goes back to the Tang Dynasty. In the dragon scale binding, the pages are staggered to reveal a continuous image along the edges of the pages that will change to a different continuous image as the pages are turned. The book opens up further to reveal a series of alphabets, starting on the left with diagrams for flag semaphore, which is a type of gesture alphabet used to convey messages across physical distances. And it was primarily used in maritime communications, but it is still used sometimes in mountainous areas where visual communication is more practical and reliable than oral or electronic communication. One of the most famous uses of Semaphore is the visual translation of the diagrams for the letter N and D, which in this case stand for nuclear disarmament, into the peace symbol. This symbol was designed by Gerald Holton in 1957 and has been in continuous use as an international symbol of peace ever since. But getting back to the alphabets in wayfinding, the idea for creating a texture alphabet that is based on a gesture alphabet came out of a series of conversations I had with my daughter Eleanor about why texture was so important to her. It turns out that her way of experiencing and navigating through the world is very different from mine. She is a physical learner and I am a mental learner. This series of alphabet variations shows the transition from a gesture alphabet to a visual alphabet and then into a physical alphabet. Here's how I translated the Semaphore alphabet into shapes. and then into shapes with layers, with visual layers that could be translated on a CNC router into a three-dimensional mold for casting paper pulp. For the book, the alphabet was printed as diagrams and as flat shapes with the color layers. And then it's here shown next to the cast paper version of the same shapes. So you can see the visual alphabet turning into the physical alphabet. And this is what the gradient file looked like to make the mold for the cast sheets. So in this image, or this casting, the shapes spell out the words texture and pattern in vertical columns of letters. And this is a couple of shots of how the CNC router is translating that gradient file into a carved mold that's being carved out of rigid foam insulation. And I had this done at Logos Graphics in San Francisco, and John Sullivan, really, who's the owner of Logos, really had to work with us a long time so we could figure out how to set up our files so that his 3D software would read our files the way we wanted it to. So it took a lot of prototyping to get there. And then here's a few shots of the casting process, starting with the mold. John Sullivan also made the pulp for this project. So he has a beater, and he would beat our pulp, and then I'd go pick it up in San Francisco. And then my studio assistant, you can see her hands in these shots, Asa Nakata, is patting the pulp into the mold. And then after the recesses are filled, the excess water has to be blotted out. And then a layer of pulp is put over the shapes to start creating the sheet, and then it has to be blotted again. And then even more pulp has to be patted in and blotted. So this is just a very quick overview of the process, which has a lot of the intermediate steps left out. But at this point, once the sheet is completely, all the pulp has been put in and blotted, we have to put it in a drying box for a couple of days before we peel it out of the mold. So we don't know for like 4 days whether or not the sheet is successful. And so there's a lot of investment that goes into each of these sheets, a lot of time investment before we know. And we got better at it as time went on, but some of our earlier ones had little bubbles and little holes that we weren't able to use those sheets. And then the pandemic happened, so no one's been making any of these sheets since March. And so I'm hoping that by the time we can get back into production to finish the edition, we'll remember how to do it, because it's a long, involved process. So these alphabet shapes also appear as cutouts at the end of each Dragon Scale booklet. And in these configurations, they spell out the words gesture and reason, also vertically. The text for wayfinding is about some of the experiential differences between physical learning and mental learning. And one of the other things that Eleanor wanted included in this book is paper that makes a lot of noise when it's turned, because as a physical learner, sound is as important to her as texture. So I had paper made at the Morgan Paper Conservatory in Cleveland, Ohio, that was designed to have a loud rattle when you turn the pages. And this short video was made by the library staff at Louisiana State University to demonstrate the sound of the paper. So hopefully you could hear that over the Zoom, but I was really pleased when they shared this video with me, because I don't say anywhere in the book, oh, by the way, the paper makes a lot of noise. They just noticed that and thought it was noteworthy enough to make a video out of. So that was really affirming for me that was getting across as part of the book. So wayfinding ended up becoming one of the most complex and ambitious projects I've ever undertaken. And it all started with a simple challenge to use texture in a book project. I learned a great deal, not only about new processes and materials, but also about myself as a learner and how my my learning experience differs so vastly from that of my daughters, which neither of us realized. We have a lot of things in common about the way we approach work in general, but we weren't really aware of how differently we navigate the world. So that was a sort of an interesting side benefit of going through this whole process. We had many conversations together about these issues. So now I'm going to talk about the project I'm working on now, and to introduce that, I'm going to just show you this pressure printed portrait of Ruth Bader Ginsburg, because this past March, my intro to book art class had just finished printing this image when my school announced that we would be finishing the semester online. And in fact, they made the announcement via text message during my class. We had literally just finished printing this image and everybody got this message on their phone. So the students never got to print the Ginsburg quotes that they had hand set in metal type that was going to go on this broadside, because we never went back to the studio after that day. But I learned this process from Barb Tettenbaum, who happened to be visiting my class on the day that we did this, and they said we were going online. And Barb had shown me how to do pressure printing maybe 25 years ago. She is one of the first people to really use pressure printing as an artistic tool in letterpress printing. But this particular way of using pressure printing, where you take a photograph and you turn that photograph into layers that can then be printed using this method, is something that was fairly new to me. And so Barb explained it to me in February, and we made this print as part of my class. And I thought it was really cool, but I had no idea how impactful it was going to end up being in my own creative practice until several months later. So this is how we do the portrait, the pressure print portrait, how we did the portrait of Ruth Bader Ginsburg. So I started with her official Supreme Court portrait, and then removed all the color. And there was a intermediate step between this. We had to punch up the contrast. So she looks a little bit zombie-ish in the black and white, because we needed to have that extra bit of detail for the next step, so that we got a good result. So the next step is that we posterize the image. So this is in Photoshop. And we want to do it with just 3 layers, because I find that 3 layers is a really reliable number for pressure printing. I think you can do 4, but you have to use different materials, and I wanted it to be as straightforward as possible for my students. So we posterize it in 3 images, and then I printed out 3 copies of the posterized image, and then we cut the layers around the white layer, the gray layer, and the black layer. So the image on the right actually is the cut paper. If you look closely, you can sort of see the edges of the paper there, but it was made out of this an inkjet printed version of the posterized image. So we just cut this with an X-Acto knife. And then we collage the layers on top of each other so that they have dimension. And then here's one of an example, or a close-up of detail shot of some of the layers before we collage them back together. So you can see that we're cutting out the white, leaving the gray and the black, and then we cut out the black. Not all the black is in this shot. I don't know why I don't have all the pieces, but then we're gonna lay the black on top of the gray. And I use a dry mount press to glue everything together. So we put dry mount adhesive on the back of the sheet before it's cut. That way the adhesive is already on there, and then after everything's cut and very delicate, we can just lay it back together and heat set it, and it will all stick together. So the plate for a pressure print, for those of you who've never done it, is printed against a solid block that is inked up in whatever color you choose. And my students chose blue for the Ginsburg portrait. And as you will see in a few minutes, I also decided to choose, I chose a different shade of blue, but I wanted to use blue as well for this project I'm working on now. So in late spring, at the beginning of the lockdown, I made a plan to do a collaborative book project with Carrie Michelani Schroeder, who's a book artist and a friend of mine who lives in San Antonio, Texas. And she was also a former grad student at Mills, and also worked for me as a studio assistant for several years. But we've never worked on a book project before this one. We chose time as our theme, and it was clear that the pandemic experience would play a leading role in this book, since our perception of time, along with everyone else's, has shifted in ways that one could never have imagined in earlier times. As the months wore on, the isolation from family and friends started to take a toll on me, and I recalled the portrait I had made of Ruth Bader Ginsburg for my class back in March, and decided I would make portraits of all my friends and family as a way to see them on my screen and later on paper when I couldn't actually see them in person. But I use a slightly different process than the hand cutting process that we used at school, because I knew I was going to have a lot of portraits. So this is a synopsis of the process that we use for this. It's a slightly expanded version of the process we use for the Ginsburg portrait. So I asked all my friends and family to take selfies of themselves, both with and without face masks. This is my friend Alan Hillesheim, who's a letterpress printer in Berkeley. And then we took the photograph and posterized the image. And this is where my studio assistants were working remotely. I was able to they were able to do this digital work from home, which was really helpful. So Asa posterized all the photos. And then from this is the new part that we didn't do in the Ginsburg portrait. Once the image was posterized, Asa and Connie Lee, who's my other studio assistant, who I believe is actually on this thing, I think I saw her name go by in the participant list. They divided up all the images and did digital line drawings of all the posterized images. And they were keeping those 2 layers in mind, or the 3 layers, the white, the gray, and the black. So you can see from this that the line drawing is in 2 colors, so to indicate the which ones get cut when. And each line drawing of the portrait took them, I think, between 4 and 6 hours to do, depending on how much detail was in people's faces. So they had to spend a lot of time working on those drawings. And then we're eventually going to cut those using a laser cutter. So, but before I do that, I double check by putting the color back into the line drawing. So I put the white, the gray, the black to make sure that I like the way that it gives me a sense of how the pressure print is going to look, although this is a much more dramatic version, because a pressure print will all be in one color, and this is, you've got the gray and the black. It's a little bit more punchy than the pressure print will be, but I can take a look at all the details this way. I also feel like it gives people kind of a superhero look, like they all look like they're in some kind of graphic novel, which is kind of fun. And then here's another photo some of you may recognize, Sandra Krupa, who is the book art curator at the University of Washington, Seattle. And here's her, one of her selfies, and then her posterized. And the posterization really depended on the quality of the photograph. So some of the posterized images were smoother than others. And so once we came up with the posterized version we liked, Connie and Asa had to figure out how to then draw around it and smooth things out a little bit sometimes from the posterized image. And then here she is with her grayscale superhero look. I'm showing you these 2 people because they get printed together for the book for reasons that are way too complicated for me to explain. So don't ask me to explain in the chat. The portraits that get printed next to each other will not be next to each other in the finished book. It's a nightmare pagination issue with this particular book structure I'm using that I'm not really ready to talk about yet. The portraits also get printed upside down to each other, although they all appear right side up in the finished book. So, so these 2 people, these 2 portraits are getting printed together. And this is how they look when I have the file that separates them into their gray layer and then the black layer. So you can see here I'll go back. So this is the gray, this is the black. So those 2 layers are going to get cut out of separate sheets of paper. And then I have these videos of the laser cutter at work. It's kind of fun. It's speeded way up. just so you can see how the cutter just really follows the vector file. So whatever we have in the digital line drawing is going to get cut. And Sandra Krupa's mask had a lot of detail, so you can see it like just cutting out all those little tiny flower and dot shapes that were in the drawing. And then Alan Hillesheim's, he's not wearing a mask in this version, so it goes a little bit quicker to get all of his details. But this is just the gray layer right now that's being cut. And then here's the cutter cutting the black layer of the same two people. There are fewer details in the black layer, so it goes a little quicker. I would say in time, this file probably took about 8 minutes to cut the gray layer and maybe 5 minutes to cut the black layer. So it's not that, long a period of time, although in laser cutting terms, it's kind of a long time to stand there in front of the machine waiting for it to finish up. But it's kind of fun to see how that works. So I was able to see everybody go by in their various layers in laser cutter. And then at this, so here's the, this is what the gray layer looks like when it's cut. So you can sort of see a more close up of all those lines or where the paper is cut. I purposely don't cut completely all the way through because I want to be able to remove all the pieces from the cutter, because I'm not sure at this point which ones I need and which ones I can discard. So I can't just pull it up and have some of it left in the cutter. I have to take it all out. So this is how it looks when it comes out. So this is the black layer, and this is me removing some of the pieces. So I have to refer back to the line drawing and the, with the color put in to sort of remember which ones that get discarded and which ones will stay in the plate. And then here's a version, let's see, this is, yeah, so that was this is the gray layer of just with all the white parts removed. And then this is the black layer. You can see I'm just holding up that mask to show the detail of some of the laser cutting. And then here's what it looks like when it's all dry mounted together. And then here's the resulting pressure print. So I chose a slightly darker blue than my students did for the Ginsburg portrait. And then here is the same image turned the other way, so you can see Alan right side up and Sandra upside down. And then here's the same portrait of the two people with their other versions. So in this one, Alan has the mask and Sandra doesn't have the mask. So there's two versions of every person who's in the book. So I'm going to show you some of the others. One of the unintended consequences of the process is the amount of time I get to spend working on each of my loved ones' faces, which I wasn't expecting. I wasn't thinking about that. So as I mentioned earlier, my studio assistants did the initial digital drawing, which took them between 4 and 6 hours per portrait. But then I had to go in later and adjust each drawing for the cutter, because I'm the one who kind of has that knowledge of how things are going to get cut apart. And so I had to spend an additional 2 to 3 hours on average of really staring at everybody's images while I was working on them. And while it's not the same as seeing someone in person, it gave me a surprisingly deep sense of connection to be spending so much time looking at people's faces. And then when I'm thinking about it later, you don't normally spend 2 to 3 hours staring at someone's face. So it makes sense that, but even though I'm just staring at a line drawing of their face, that I'm getting this sense of connection to the people in the portrait, people that I know and love. So so that's been a very unexpected and wonderful sort of side benefit of doing this project, is having that sense of connection at a time when I haven't been able to see any of these people in person, this whole time. So I'm going to be doing a total of 52 portraits for this book. And the portrait part of the book project is only one what is it? Like 1/10 of no, 1/12 of the content for the entire book. So it's been a very satisfying part. So the thing that I just showed you was, and here's like that same person with the paper cut version of her. This was just the first half that I was able to show you. So I finished printing the first 26 portraits, and I'm now in the process of adjusting the second half, the second 26, and I'll be printing those probably in January. So one of the other things, unexpected consequences of making all these portraits is I'm having a very hard time throwing away all the parts that I don't use. So these are the parts that get peeled out because they're not part of the plate for the pressure print, but I can still recognize people. And it's just like the thought of like scooping everyone's face and throwing them in the trash has been very difficult. And so I've kept them, and I don't know, I feel like they're kind of interesting. I might be able to use them for some other project in the future, or at the very least, I won't have to deal with throwing them away quite yet. So that's also been a very interesting journey that I wasn't expecting.
Julie, these are stunning. Do you mind if I ask a quick question?
Sure.
There were two questions about paper. One was size, which I know we can kind of see size, but I didn't know what your dimensions were. And also, what type of paper are you using for it, and do you find good for pressure printing?
I'm using, let me go back so you can see. When I'm using Mohawk Superfine eggshell finish. So you can see a little bit of texture here from the texture of the paper. But I'm using Cougar Smooth to do my proofing, which I don't have a shot of, but those two different types of paper take the ink completely differently. And so the Cougar, because it's smooth, I think part of the reason is because it's smooth, it takes a lot less ink, and the superfine eggshell takes, I have to add a huge amount of ink. And then if I need to proof in the middle for some reason, I proof on the Cougar, it like comes out really, really dark because it's like over inked looking. And then the size of the sheet that I'm working on here is 18 by 24.
Great. And we're already really nerdy. So
Yeah.
what weight are you using on your paper?
What?
What weight?
Oh, what weight? 80-pound text.
Great. Thank you.
I love the nerdy questions. Yeah.
Right? Those are the things we're like, ooh, when we try this. Thank you. These are stunning.
Yeah. So then my last shot is just a very brief video of the one of the plates being printed. So you can see in the bed of the press, they're just these solid blocks. You can sort of see a shadow of people's portraits, and that's just from the ink being picked up on the paper. There's not actually any image. I've used those same blocks for all the portraits. When I'm done printing a run, I just wipe off the excess ink and then start again with the next person. I can print 3 runs a day. I've been averaging 3 runs a day for this. And when the cylinder is going to roll forward, and when it rolls backwards, if you look at the cylinder, you can sort of see the plate, the collage pressure print plate is taped to the cylinder. So it's always behind the paper that's being printed. So here is this. There it's coming off. I have to roll back in order to show it to you though. You can see the plate there on the press. And here is the finished portrait. So so that's another sort of side benefit that I wasn't expecting is, so I spent all those hours adjusting people's faces, and then I spend hours, or an hour per person probably, putting their collage together, putting it back together to dry mat it together. And then I spend an hour or more watching their face roll off the press 95 times. So I really feel like I'm, seeing my people in some way or other. And it's been a very interesting process. So so that is it for me, but thank you very much for having me, and I'd be happy to answer any questions that people have.
Wonderful. We're all clapping, first of all. I'll remove the spotlight if you want to stop sharing.
Yeah, I will do that.
Can see everyone.
Okay.
I will start off because we did have another wonderful dorky question about the weight and the stock of the paper you're using as your plate for the pressure printing.
I'm using Cougar 80-pound cover. I mean, 80-pound text, sorry.
Okay. Oh yeah, so your proofing paper is the same one you're using for the
Yeah,
plate
yeah.
paper? Nice.
So, and I would say after doing half of them, there were certain points where I probably should have added another layer of thinner paper to get a little bit more detail. But, at a certain point I had committed and now I want the whole book to look the same. So we're sticking with it. And so I'm not unhappy with any of it, but after doing so many of them, it's like, well, I probably could have done it like this, but next time, if I ever do something like this again, I'll know for next time.
Isn't that art projects, right?
Yeah, exactly.
And then are the base that you're printing on, is that linoleum or plexi that's in the press bed?
It's actually, it's hardboard. So it's sort of like a masonite, smooth, 1/8 inch hardboard that's attached to a 3/4 inch MDF. So I can cut the hardboard on the laser cutter. So I wanted these images to have rounded corners. So I just put in a laser cutter, cut out the rounded corners, glued it onto MDF with wood glue, and then stick it in the press. And it has to be shimmed a little bit because it's not quite type high.
That's wonderful. I will see the gluttony of more pressure prints in the world. As
I hope so.
Yeah, that's wonderful. Well, you can always tell a teacher, right? I love the letterpress community because we're so willing to share, and that a teacher can quickly say, yes, this, and this. So Thank you for that. I will say there's one more question in chat. If you guys have more questions, feel free. We can have you unmute and ask or put them in the chat. The one I was seeing before was, what kind of fiber are you using for the cast paper?
It's cotton. So it's some kind of cotton linter that I'm not exactly sure because John Sullivan makes the pulp. But we did a few tests with different types of cotton linters to see. I wanted it to be hard enough so that when you're looking at the book, you can touch it and it won't pill up or collapse or anything like that, because that was one of the reasons it's there. It's not just to look at the texture, but for someone to actually feel the texture. So he puts some, what does he put in there? Methyl cellulose. So he puts a little bit of methyl cellulose in the water when he's making the pulp, because that makes it a little bit harder when it dries, but not so much that it affects the look of it or the way it behaves. So, and then we had to really spend a lot of time testing out the beat time, because if you beat it too long, it shrinks too much. And then it comes out of the mold and it just doesn't look right. But if you don't beat it enough, it's too soft. And so we found like the perfect thing, and everybody took notes, and hopefully it will the rest of the edition will come out. We've done maybe, I think we have 20 more to go or something like that. Maybe 18 sets left, but they take so long, and each we can do 3. If they're successful, we can make the sheets for 3 books at a time out of 2 5-gallon buckets of pulp. And then I go back, I order another load and drive over the bridge and get the rest. So
that book is stunning. I loved the conversation about between you and your daughter. I thought that was really wonderful. And you had said something about your laser cutter. Was that the one you said is from 2001?
Yeah.
Somebody wanted to know what the brand is.
Yes. I always say when people ask me this that I should be getting a cut from the company, because I love this laser cutter so much. It's Universal Laser Systems, and they're in Flagstaff, Arizona. And there's 2 reasons why I would highly recommend this company. One is their machines are built like tanks. I mean, my cutter is going to be 20, or maybe it's 20 now. No, it'll be 20 next year. And it's had very few problems over the course of that time. The second reason I recommend them is they have excellent customer service. So every problem I've ever had, they've been able to talk me through it on the phone, and I've never had to have a technician come out. And so whenever I call, and I've only had to do this maybe 3 times over the last 20 years. And I call them and they say, well, we'll send a technician if we need to, but let's try and fix it over the phone. And they've been on the phone with me for hours and we fixed every problem. There was one time where they were on with me and we were trying to fix it. And they said, okay, well, why don't you try to do X, Y, and Z and call me back? So we did the thing. I had someone here with me. We're trying to figure it out. We call back and say, okay, that didn't work. And say, okay, we've been doing some research. Try this next. And they fixed everything. And so anyway, so those are my two. That's my plug for Universal Laser Systems. And then also I was thinking about, I talked to them earlier this year about getting, maybe it's time to trade it in and get a new machine. They said, well, are you having any problems? And I said, no, I mean, it's built like a tank. They said, why don't we just come and refurbish it? There's no reason why you need to buy a new one. So, they could have made a huge amount of money on me by saying, yes, we will sell you a new machine. But instead they're saying, no, we can just, refurbish it. It'll be fine. So we're waiting until better times, pandemic wise, for someone to come out and do that. So hopefully next year. But in the meantime, I don't have any problems. So it's not like I'm in dire need of the refurbishment now. It was just sort of planning ahead for, will I need to replace my 20-year-old machine? And apparently maybe I won't. So that's really great.
That is the customer service we need in the world today.
Yes. Yeah, for sure.
Somebody said, do you know the model number and size?
I don't know the model number off the top of my head. You would think I would, but I don't say it that often. But it's the bed size is 18 by 24, which is the same size as my Vandercook bed. So I can print an 18 by 24 sheet. And so I wanted to be able to, if I printed the maximum size sheet, I want to be able to take it over to the laser cutter and stick it in. So
yeah, that totally makes sense. Yeah. Let's see, we've got lots of questions. So I'll see if there's a good one. The one that came in next, I don't think there's any more as related to that question. So I'm going to go to Sabbath's question about, do your books go to museums mostly? Where would people be able to experience them in real life? Which is a wonderful question.
A lot of my books go into institutional libraries, so university libraries. So you can actually see them if you have a college in a nearby town that has special collections. You could contact them or look up their catalog and see if my book is there. But I have books at in libraries in all parts of the country. So obviously not every library, but they're kind of scattered around. So so hopefully people can find one. That's one of the things I love about artist books is it's not like a museum. I mean, I have some books in museums, but I don't know that people can actually go see those at museums. But at libraries, you can. I mean, that's the whole point of a library. So it's really great that to make books in editions and then have them placed in places that are open to the public where people can make an appointment and go in and see the book. Well, maybe not right now, but eventually, after the vaccine and everything, we'll be able to go back and see books. And I really appreciate that about libraries. And I also love going to libraries and looking at other people's books. It's a great resource.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. There's a question about the paper you were talking about, the paper for the typography in the first book you talked about, and that's solid all the way from front to back, right?
Yeah,
when you're doing that casting.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Now, people have asked me that before. Is it hollow inside? But now we're patting Asa Nakata, who's she's the one who makes the paper. She really has to pat. Like I think she spends half a day at least, just patting pulp into these shapes, or maybe it's even longer. But anyway, it's a long process, but they're solid, but they're still light. Once all the water dries out of it, it's not like the sheets are not heavy at all, but they're really firm.
That's great. Well, and it facilitates experiencing it, right? Yeah. Later on. Mm-hmm. The question did come up about using the hardboard versus plexi as that pressure ink plate. Is there any reason you prefer the hardboard?
I like the hardboard because it has a little bit of texture, or it has like, it's not really, I guess it is texture, but I feel like it has more character than Plexi. Plexi is really smooth, like it's completely smooth, and hardboard is smooth, but it has a little bit of, you can feel like there's a fiber kind of look to it. I've also done pressure prints right on MDF, which also has an interesting texture. So I kind of always look at that. So for that reason, I'm not a big fan personally of Plexi, just because I feel like it's too smooth. It works fine, but it's a little too smooth for my taste. And then lino, I feel, has got too much texture. So the texture of the lino is kind of fighting with your pressure print image a little bit. It will work, but I don't like it. So I'm in between like the lino people and the Plexi people. I like the hardboard. So I could cut Plexi in my laser cutter, so I could use that, but I prefer the hardboard.
You're in the middle of the three little bears for
Yeah,
pressure printing substrates.
yeah.
I like that. I like this question as well. Do you have a separate storage area for all of your sketchbooks and technical notation versus where you keep like your diverse and highly technical projects? You showed us the small space and the 75 flat files, but how do you keep all your notations and things?
Oh, so all the notations for how to put the books together, or things like, how to color the pulp and all that stuff, they go into a series of notebooks. And the book that, well, now it's 2 volumes because we ran out of room in the first one, but the one that has all the notes about how to put all the books together is called The Book. And it's, because people work for me usually between 2 and 3 years, and then they move on, and that's sort of by design. I don't expect anyone to want to work in my small studio forever, but I want it to be a jumping off point so they can move on to start their own studios or do other things. But then we have to transfer that knowledge to the next person. And so having those notes is really important. But each assistant has their own notebook where they're keeping notations about what they're doing. And then we have the book where everything gets rewritten in, so that it's like the master book. But still sometimes, like now when I have no one working for me and I have to be putting things together for clients without my assistant, I'm looking at the book going, wait, how do we do this? Who designed this? Of course it was me, but it's like, why are we doing it this way? But I can't just change it, because it turns out usually there is a reason why we need to do it like this. If I read forward, it's like, oh, right, okay, now I need to do this. But yeah, it's really important to keep those notes.
Yeah, that's some good insight behind the scenes. I will say, you mentioned before we started that if it didn't get mentioned, speaking of the book, I was supposed to mention PBS The Bookmakers.
Oh, right.
So.
There's a film that came out a couple months ago called The Bookmakers, which was put together by a young filmmaker in the Bay Area. And he really wanted to do an overview of people who make books, artist books, and printing, letterpress printing, and the Codex Book Fair has a big part of the film. So I think it's a really enjoyable documentary about the book. And right now you can stream it for free on PBS if you go to the PBS website. I don't know how long it will be up on the, as a streaming, but right now it's been making the rounds of PBS stations. They've been showing it on TV. So that's been kind of fun too, to have it be shown on television. But it's about an hour, and it's good overview of book art.
Well, next Friday, we don't have anyone as the official speaker because Letterform Archives has to reschedule. We could do like a book club PBS watch. So if you guys watch it this week, we could talk about it next Friday.
It's like book club. Yeah,
exactly. Yeah. It's our first official book club ham hang. No, I'm just kidding. I don't have time to start more things. No, I will watch it. That sounds just like something I would watch in my spare time. We have a really good question about someone who is just finding out about you and book arts, and wants to know if you have any advice for artists who are starting to work with artist books and create their own.
If you are interested in learning how to make different kinds of books or different ways of mark making and all that stuff, there are several, I shouldn't say many, there are more than you'd think, but there are several major centers for the book around the country that offer workshops in almost any aspect of bookmaking. One is the San Francisco Center for the Book, which is near me. They're doing all their workshops online now, but you know, they're doing a lot of them. In normal times, they have in-person workshops almost every day of the week, all year round. So there's a lot of options for that. There's also the Minnesota Center for the Book in Minneapolis. There's the New York Center for the Book in New York, or the Center for the Book. It's not really called the New York Center for the Book. It's the Center for the Book in New York City. And then there are other smaller centers that I'm probably gonna, you know, insult by not mentioning, but those are like the three major ones. But if you Google, you know, book art or Center for the Book, hopefully a lot of the other ones. I know there's one in Austin, the Austin Center for the Book. And there's one in upstate New York, but I can't remember what it's called exactly. But anyway, there are a lot of places that offer book art workshops, either in person or online right now. So there's a lot of ways to learn about these things. And then also, as I mentioned earlier, there are a lot of colleges and universities that have special collections libraries that you could make an appointment to go in and look at books. Like some places will, if you say, I'm interested in tunnel books or carousel books, and you can find out if they can pull all of what they have. Or I'm interested in the work of Tim Ely or the work of Clifton Metter. Do you have any books? And you can go look at books by you know, the person's work. So it's a great resource if you're, you know, for people who are just starting out to be able to see what's out there. Also, plug for my school one more time. If you're interested in getting your MFA in book art, there are four. Are there four right now? But anyway, there are three or four. There are four, I think, institutions that have MFA book art programs now in the country, and we are one of them. So you can, anyone who's interested in that could feel free to email me for more information. I think Stephanie was going to put it in the chat, the link to our school, the web page for the program.
Yeah, I shared it a couple times. I will say when I took a summer institute class, the campus was beautiful and I loved being in the space. So
yeah, you have a beautiful campus.
Yeah.
That's for sure.
I think a really good last question, maybe to wrap up on, was, can you talk a bit about your development process, especially the early stages, and any research that you decide to do? Because I think your books are so thoughtful. That's a good question.
I do a lot of research at the beginning, and to me, that's part of the whole process of making a book for me. It's not just about making the end product. It's really this whole process of learning. And so when I start a project, I'm really, what I'm feel like I'm doing is I'm starting the process of research. And I don't know what the book is going to be at that point. I'm just learning about the things I feel like I need to know. And I think for wayfinding, it turned out, I can't remember now, I'd have to look at my notes, but it started out in a completely different place from my initial research. And it wasn't going where I wasn't feeling right, you know, it wasn't like working. And so then I started to like step back, figure out what I'm doing. And I think the learning, the physical learning versus mental learning, was like the third go around of research. So a lot of projects are like that. It's like you think you know what you want to learn, you start the research, and then it takes you down a rabbit hole where you have to do research in something else, and then that takes you somewhere else. And then pretty soon the book is still connected in my mind to the original thing, but it's not a straight line. So that's the first step, is the research, and that could take, you know, several months to figure out. And while I'm doing research, I'm taking notes, I'm writing, you know, drafts of things that may or may not get used. And then at a certain point, I start to visualize things in my head, and I start to think about the book structure. And so then I start making models, and the early models I'm not using, like I have no idea what materials I'll eventually use, but I'm just using cougar usually, like I have drawers full of text weight, cover weight, and I'm just trying things out. And I have a lot of book board too. And a lot of times those models, the first model doesn't work. Technically, the second model works, but it's not doing what I need it to do. So then I have to make a new model. So that process starts up. So the research starts first, but then the model making starts up, and then it's like juggling these two things. And then the content starts to develop, and then I'm juggling like 3 balls. And any ball seems like it's in the air, and by the time it comes down, it might be a different shape or a different color. And then I have to like, oh, now what am I going to do? And but as I tell my students, when they get to a point where they're trying to figure out what to do, and they get to a point where they feel like, oh no, I'm going to have to figure out how to do this thing that I have no idea how to do. And I say, well, this is a fun part. I mean, that's why you're making these things, not so that you can just use the skills you have, but so you can use those skills to take you somewhere you've never been. And so even 30 years later, that to me is the real joy of continuing to make books. Is I'm not just making the same book over and over. At least I hope I'm not. But I'm always thinking about new ways of presenting content to an audience. And it's not just for the novelty's sake, but because the ideas in my head kind of demand certain kind of, like, I want it to come out in a certain way so that people will have to interact with the physical object in a very specific way that maybe until I get closer to the end of the design, I really don't know what that is. But I try things out, and it's like, well, that didn't do what I wanted, so now I have to try something else. So it's like that constant process of figuring things out and testing things out and rejecting things until you find the one that works.
I think that is a wonderful way to say it and kind of end the day. Thank you, Julie, for being here today and really wowing us all and sharing more about your process. I would say thank you so much.
Well, thank you. It's been my pleasure to be here.
It was great.
Thanks, Jim.
I will say 2 things. One, we are going to start to have programming here at Hamilton in the new year. So if you're looking for places to take online classes, normally it's tough to get to Two Rivers, Wisconsin all year round, but we'll start to have some programs through the year. So if you want to learn more about letterpress printing and even some bookmaking, you'll be able to take those. I want to also say thank you everyone who helps support these Hamilton Hangs, and the way that you can do that is by becoming a member. We love keeping these events free because it allows us to share really amazing artists, and we all learn every Friday. So if you can become a member, I want to say please do so, and I know there are so many of you here, so thank you so much for your support.